So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second in our series for the Academy's Contemplative Practice. I am Dr. Maria Hamilton Abegunde. I am the director of the Graduate Mentoring Center. The center is part of the University Graduate School, and our vision and mission are exactly that, to offer mentoring for graduate students in a very holistic way. This series is part of, in fact, a series that I've wanted to do for quite a long time. It is supported by the Institute for Advanced Study. And so it is part of their conversations towards a bold university in the 21st century. And so our question is, what does it look like to have the Academy as a contemplative practice? And our guest today is the fabulous Melissa Carter. Before I do introduction, however, I'm going to invite us to just take a moment and to just rest a little. Perhaps you are coming from another place. Perhaps you are coming from your living room to your dining room. Perhaps you are today homeschooling. Perhaps today you just simply need to rest a little bit more. So I invite you to take a breath and just to breathe, inhaling and exhaling. Just allowing yourself perhaps to feel or acknowledge what it might be in this moment, just to be still. Taking another deep breath, inhaling and exhaling. And when you are ready, open your eyes. So, Melissa Carter is the interim senior director. This is new, interim senior director for global spiritual life at New York University, and is the head of mindfulness education and programming for Mindful NYU. In 2019, Melissa launched Mindful NYU internationally, expanding its reach to become the largest campus-wide global mindfulness initiative. Melissa's career began in the hip hop music business at Violator Management. From there, she became a digital sales and marketing executive at both Warner Music Group and Universal Music Group. After a decade in the industry, Melissa embarked on a spiritual journey that inspired transformations in both her career and daily life. As a spiritual thought leader, Melissa takes a holistic approach to problem solving. She has a drive to understand how systems work and how they can function more efficiently using mindfulness and grassroots practices. She holds an MBA in media management from the Metropolitan College of New York. She is an adjunct professor for the Silver School of Social Work and is the New York Trauma Informed Facilitator for Connection Coalition. Welcome, welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so happy to be here with you and with all of you. I'm usually the one sitting in the seat facilitating the conversation. And so to have it this way is a little, is exciting and stimulating, and I'm a little nervous. So I will be using my own tools throughout this. And I apologize for being a little bit late. I have been on Zoom since 8 a.m. Wild times, but I'm really grateful to be here. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And I want to say that I first met Melissa when we were engaging and in practice actually with the group. And she led a practice for us in an activity that was really wonderful in helping us think through what we needed to do, what was feasible, what we dreamed, possible. And so one of the reasons why you were one of the people I wanted to invite to this series, because if you listen to your what your background is, right? That official biography, it tells us that you have been in multiple worlds, right? That the idea of doing contemplative practice in the world is not necessarily always in contention with being in the academy or being in different places. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted you here, among many other. But I want to begin with the question that we have been asking everyone who's part of the series. And so that question is, how do you define contemplative practice? What does that look like in your life? How do you define that? We hear the term mindfulness. People are practicing mindfulness, doing mindfulness, but how do you define contemplative practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the practice of being aware of what you're aware of. And for me, that allows me to, when I am in that space, in that state of being aware of what I'm aware of, I'm in choice. And it gives me a sense of agency rather than disempowerment. When I'm being absorbed or consumed by something and I'm not able to step, just a little step back to observe it, that I'm not in my truest, authentic state. I'm in my thoughts, I'm in my feelings, I'm in certain parts of my brains that need regulation. And so for me, it's the practice of being aware of what you're aware of and choosing the choice that's authentic to truth. And sometimes that behavior may feel counterintuitive as you move on your path or change patterns, but that to me is what it is. It's really a lifelong practice. It's not, it's a state of being. And we have tools that help us to that state of being, but it's a state of being.
I want to come back to the tools at a later time because I want, to talk a little bit about what tools are available to us and what tools have been helpful to you. The next question that I want to ask is, given what you just said, contemplative practice, being aware of what, right, you are aware of, and about choice, having choice. What is the relationship between those things, contemplative practice and how you've defined it, and the academy? And the academy, the large version of the institution we consider to be the academy. What is the relationship? Is there a relationship for you right now, or does a relationship need to be developed?
Whew, okay. I have several answers for that. I think that the academy is a microcosm of the whole. And because of that, if I'm understanding what you mean by academy, I think I would answer that this way. How you show up in one area of your life is how you show up in all areas of your life. And having that choice and that agency, how you show up in the academy versus how you show up outside of the academy, is there a difference? And if there is, asking yourself why. And why are you showing up in that way, one way and not the other, right? Like, is your whole self at the table every time you're at a table? And are you ever not at a table? You're at the table of life. And so I think using these contemplative practices allows you to bring that whole self to the table at all times. And I don't separate the academy from all, so that's why I think I'm struggling with this question, but I know that in the Western world and in the mainstream it is, but for me it is not, and I think that's what drives my work, is how I show up in this area of my life is how I show up in that area of my life, and it is my human practice to allow myself, to give myself that agency and allowance to do so. And I believe what we're doing here by these contemplative practices is helping people do the same and giving them the confidence, the agency, and the empowerment to regulate and be with what is within themselves. So they're therefore able to show up as whole selves, no matter where they are. It's wherever their feet stand. So that might be contrary to some, but it is what I believe, and what I believe we should be giving. Like, imagine what a world it would be if we all were not in a performative state of ourselves and we were in our full self at all times. I would just think that the world would be very different, and we would interact differently. We'd communicate differently. We'd hold each other differently. That's what I believe.
Thank you. So these questions I'm asking you because I know everybody has a different understanding of contemplative practice and the academy. And I'm so glad to hear you say that, because at the center, one of the things we talk about is how do we graduate whole, WHOLE, human beings? How do we help graduate whole human beings, right? And so what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, and not, if I'm hearing you correctly, that for you, there's not a separation, there's not a division. It's sort of like work life, right? Work life. There's work and there's life, right? And that we have these separations for various and sundry reasons, right? But what I'm hearing you say is that the academy is part of your life, you are part of that life, but it's your life. How you are in one place, right, is how you are in another place, that you are living in a way that allows you or invites you to bring your entire self to the spaces in which you exist.
Exactly.
Right?
And you're also talking to someone that believes in, I don't believe in, this isn't work for me, right? Like, I'm being of service. This is how my calling, this is that, because I am connected to what I believe is my assignment. I wouldn't say assignment, but my truth, or the way I want to contribute to society and humanity. So I had jobs. The hip hop industry was a job, or was work, right? Music industry was work. And I had to balance, and I was in a very performative state of myself, which led me to here. So I'm very thankful for that time of my life, because it led me to here. But there's a very clear difference between that was a job and work. And I'm still very passionate about music. But at the end of the day, I really just wanted to be a fan of music. I didn't want to, be Puff Daddy. And once I was able to get into my truth, I was able to understand that. And then you're talking to someone who doesn't look at, I hear a lot about work-life balance. And I always push back, well, what's the human balance in that? Right? It's about human balance. It's not work-life balance. This is your life. And are you walking towards your life, or are you walking away from it?
Can you share with us perhaps something in when you had a job, right? When you had a job. And I think it is good for us to hear the distinctions that people make, right? And you are in service, and what is your calling, and these things. There are so many different ways to frame that. And it does also help to frame or reframe your vision of where you are and how you approach that, right? So that's important, because we've had earlier conversations with others about the nature of production, right? Of having to produce, right? And how that can lead to certain types of stresses, but also a misalignment, right? With how one is living in coordination with other people. But what happened? Was there something in particular that led you to move from a job to make a choice to being in service and to thinking about how everything is intersected, how this is life? Was there something in particular along your path that led you?
Yeah. Great question. And I'm happy to share. My spiritual path is one of unlearning, of unlearning everything that has kept me, or been indoctrinated into me, or has been developed within me as a coping mechanism, or a unconsciously and consciously, is a way to survive life. And I believe in my spiritual path, which has really become the forefront of my existence in the last decade, was to unlearn anything that kept me from my truest agency, like my truest power, my truest value, my inherent worth. And there's a lot of indoctrinated narrative that I've had to unlearn, that of being a Black woman, that of both my parents passed when I was a child, so that grief, childhood abuse, like there was a lot I had to unlearn that was told to me of who I was, and to unlearn to come home to who I always was. And that's someone of love, of power, of value, and worth. And when I took all that noise and all that narrative out, a whole other path was present. And before that moment, before those moments, working in the music industry, I liked music. I wanted to succeed. I wanted to be, you know, to all the sparkly, shiny objects, to say how great I was and to show how much I could do and how much I could overcome. And I was very successful in the music industry. I was working with, you know, some of the top performers and executives in the world. I was one of Billboard's top 30 under 30 executives. My career was always stellar. And I remember like some of my toughest decisions was, how was I going to get from the Grammys to Yankee Stadium for the Eminem concert in 24 hours? And, you know, then that was so cool. And my resume was shiny and sparkly. And I was also miserable. I was partying like there was no tomorrow. I was living a very unhealthy life in a relationship I shouldn't have been in. I was obese and walking with a cane at the age of 30 and contemplating ending my life every day. And it was because I hadn't dealt with all the trauma, all the pain, all of what society told me of who I was, and the life experiences I went through. And I put it all into my work. But my work showed value and my greatness. But I didn't have that in me. And I remember sitting on a plane one day and not being able to fit into the seat. And I was sitting there thinking about, oh, I'm going to have to ask for a seatbelt extension. And I got very embarrassed and had a lot of shame about that. And I wouldn't ask for it. So I put up like a sweater over me and just lied that my seatbelt was fastened. And I remember in that moment being very aware of how restricted I felt, and very aware of how limited and I couldn't move and boxed in. And I was like, this is my life. This is my life. And it was in that moment I knew I had to make a change. And so I began to make a change with my health, with my relationships, with my boundaries. And a year later, I'm no longer walking with a cane. This was a decade ago, but a year later then, I was no longer walking with a cane. I was no longer obese. I was healthy. And I got laid off from Universal Music Group. So now, a year after this, I've left a partner. I fell in love with someone in another country. I lost all this weight. I look in the mirror, I don't recognize myself. And now I've gotten let go from the job that defined me. And I remember being in that moment, bare-boned, totally like, this is a blank page. What am I going to do? Oh my goodness. And literally having other record labels call the same day I got let go, just come to us, just come to us, just come to us. And I knew I had a moment of, this is a moment for me to drastically transform or start musical chairs. And I chose the first one, and I had no idea what I was going to do, but there was a small voice in me that said, choose the unknown, choose to dig deeper, choose to get to know me. And since that day, I have been dedicated to that voice. And that voice led me to then become a personal trainer, because I thought that was the calling, and that was, I'm going to help people lose weight and get healthy. And then I quickly realized that I didn't care about bicep curls and all that. I just wanted to work out. And then I started coming into like my intuitive gifts and my spirituality and doing life coaching, and then built all these online programs, and then got very into bringing mindfulness into corporate companies because I realized what an opportunity and hole that was. And then I said, I keep telling everyone to listen to that little voice. Let me challenge that. So I put all my stuff in storage 3 years ago and booked a one-way ticket overseas and said, I'm only going to go where my body tells me to go, where this little voice tells me to go. I ended up going to 15 different countries, leading workshops and seminars about intuitive and emotional intelligence and mindfulness and meditation. Went all over the world, never wanting to come back to New York, and felt a call to come back to New York. Had no idea why. Came back to New York, and randomly one day my computer broke, and I was like, let me, I was like, oh, I don't want to do this online business anymore. It's too much. I'm supposed to be doing something else, but I don't know what that else is. I'm ready for something more. I'm supposed to be, and I kept praying, let me be used in a different way. Let me be used in the right way. And literally 3 days later, I got the NYU call. And now just under 2 years, I've had two promotions. I'm the head of global spiritual life. And I don't know if I would have gotten here if I hadn't gone to 15 other countries and experienced 15 other cultures and been through what I've been through and really used these practices to help me get to my truth, to know how to discern what's indoctrinated and what's not, to discern my inherent value from someone else's messaging. And those practices saved my life. And I'm very clear on that. And I want to get that to as many people as possible because I know the power of it. And so that was a very long answer to your question. I don't even really know what the question was anymore, but that's the answer.
You answered the question. You answered the question, and I'm so grateful for you trusting to tell that story. Right. The question was, what happened? What happened to get you from a job to where you are now, right? In New York at NYU. And so it is actually a very perfect answer because one of the things that I think, not to speak for anybody else here who's not here, but one of the things that has been really made clear to us this moment in time with the pandemic, with the increasing and more visible, perhaps more public, more active in the media, racial unrest all over the world, but particularly here in the US, is that this moment is a moment of deep unrest for many, right? So your story is really one that demonstrates a number of things as people are reconsidering, for grad students perhaps, and for faculty and for staff like who are in institutions researching. Some of the questions that have come up are like, what do I do? Like, should I even be here when there is so much that's happening in the world? What is the relevance of the work that I'm doing?
Yeah.
What is my relevance if I am not contributing in some way to make change, right? Can I help? And there have been so many amazing things here in Bloomington that have happened because people have asked these other questions. The mutual aid community group that started, Humanity for the Win. There's so many incredible things that have happened because those questions had to be asked. And
Yeah.
right now, because we are with ourselves so much, right? That what do you ask yourself? Right? What do you ask yourself? And I've been asking people that I'm working with, like, what are the 5 questions you need to ask? Right? And what are 3 questions like you need to ask your community? Those 5 questions are for yourself. Right? And so what you're also offering us at this moment is at a question of like, at what point do we begin to trust our knowing? Because this is also something that I think that perhaps you get sick, or perhaps you have an inkling, well, maybe that's not the research I want to do.
Right.
Maybe that's not where I want to go. But because, and David Robinson Morris, who was our first speaker, he talked about this also, the unlearning. What is the unlearning that we need to do in order to move forward, right? There's so many good things that come out of research, that come out of having colleagues, having a community of scholars, right? Having the privilege really to be in spaces where we could do this work that we do. But what is the unlearning that we have to do to ask some essential questions? And so that is, I think, a marvelous way of looking at that, and also thinking about that our journeys don't have to take one trajectory, right?
Absolutely.
Right, like, 15 countries, coming back to New York. I saw you laughing earlier. I said New York, so um, I just these ways, and it's also a lesson in that, how does one in fact jump into the unknown with all of the work and the preparation that is done, and how our lives and our practices of coming into the unknown is in fact the contemplative practice, right?
Can I say a few things there?
Yes.
You know, one of the biggest lessons out of this whole journey for me, and this was probably one of the hardest ones to accept, was I had a lot of judgment at first about the path and about letting go of other paths to get on this path. And how I went from this huge career in the music industry, making six figures, hanging out with celebrities, that was cool, to like literally making under 30, or I think it was under 25 grand to become a trainer. And I had a lot of judgment about that. Like, well, what are people going to say about me? And, I couldn't cut it, and I failed, and I did this and I did that. And then I thought to myself, and I kept this as part of my practice, reminding myself is everything in that music industry prepared me for this moment. Everything in the personal training business to then doing intuitive coaching where I'm actually connecting in with someone's body, right? Staring at bodies for 18 months gets you a little bit more connected to a person than if I hadn't had that experience. Learning how to radically care for myself, I now am able to help other people, right? So like every single thing, including the pain of my parents' death, including unlearning indoctrinative narrative or unlearning abusive language that was given to me as a child. All of that has prepared me for this moment, for this talk, for the next thing I'm going to do, right? And I really take that very seriously, because then it's a part, again, like it's a part of like we are evolving non-linear complex beings, and we have to constantly get to know ourselves and be in intimate dialogue with ourselves. And that helps me constantly figure out and adapt my role in moving humanity forward. And I'll share this with you. So when the uprising started happening after George Floyd's murder, I have always been someone that will protest. And so I was, on the front lines at the protest. I was, no problem, face to face with police officers, working with organizations here in New York to do the protests on the bullhorn, all that. And then I was also leading global spiritual life for the school and the various communities that we serve on campus. And I was burning out. And I was just like waking up, going to the protest, coming home, holding space at school, this, that. And I cannot do it all. I cannot do it all and live Black. I cannot do it all. And I was emotionally drained. I was exhausted and realized, oh, my role at this moment in life has changed, and I must adapt, where I can't go to all the protests. I can't be on the front lines and on the bullhorn. I have to save that energy to then lead my community at NYU through this, right? They're relying on that leadership from me. I'm responsible for that leadership. And it was a really clear moment to me of, oh, I have to take care of myself in a new way. And so what I would say to anyone who's trying to figure out how to approach this moment of life, it's to know you can't do it all, is to be okay with that, and to figure out what is your role by listening to yourself. What lights you up? What gets you going? How do you want to contribute? The questions I asked myself before I became a personal trainer was, how do I feel? Actually, I wrote down a list. I remember I was sitting in Italy being like, I have no job. What am I going to do? This is crazy. And I wrote down, what do I never want to do again? How do I want to feel? And what can I create out of that? And that's how I started the new path of the unknown. And since then, I've consistently, persistently started to keep asking myself, what do I want to not do? What doesn't feel good? What doesn't light me up? What feels performative? And what keeps me in my truth? Because me and my truth is quite powerful. And because it's powerful, I'm able to lead in a way that if I'm not in my truth, I cannot. And I'm also clear on that too.
Thank you so much for that. I'm holding all of this. I want to move, not necessarily in a different direction, but there is a question that I want to ask. I'm thinking about Adrienne Marie Brown from Emergent Strategy, right? In this idea of shaping and changing worlds, right? That's the subtitle for that. And so the other question I've been asking people is, how do we create an academic institution that is bold, intentional, dynamic, adaptive, interdependent, and transformative, right?
Yeah.
How do we create, like you've given us some ways to think about asking questions for ourselves, right? Asking questions even for community in around this idea, but at the institutional level, particularly since, you know, you also are in this space and really very conscious about how to move through this space, right? What are some of the questions that institutions, academic institutions in particular, perhaps need to ask themselves at this moment, and how do they create? Because this is the series, right? And I really want to stop and just give gratitude to Christina and Suzanne from IAS, you know, who is co-sponsoring this series here, and them really trusting and going with the flow, as we all had to change things. And so we changed from what our original, the pandemic made everything change, right, into this form, but it gave us a little bit more freedom to do some work. So I want to thank you all, you know, for the opportunity for that, to have these conversations. But this idea of a bold university of the 21st century, like, how do we create such a thing intentionally, dynamic, adaptive, and transformative? What are the questions that need to be asked, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what keeps me up at night and guides my work right now, right? Like, we have to move the 20th century model to a 21st century student. And this generation is quite, I would even say, demanding transparency, wants to be a part of the solution, and it's quite brilliant, really. And I had an employee once share with me, if we can stop trying to start at the resolution and start at the question, we'll actually get a lot more done. That's not exactly how she worded it, but that's how I'm going to word it now. And I truly believe that, because I think it's important in when we talk about programming will not change the world, right? Programming will give you, and Lisa Coleman, our chief diversity officer, always says that, and I actually really agree with her. But the programming that we offer, if we can service the need and make it need-based, we have a much better opportunity to help develop our students in a holistic way, where we're offering them holistic leadership. And holistic leadership is bringing our full selves to the table and modeling that, asking them to bring their full selves to the table, and meeting in the middle. So I know at Global Spiritual Life, anything we do, we run it through the students first. Say, hey, does this resonate? Does this land with you? Does this make sense to you? We also encourage space for people to say, like, our faculty and staff and administrators, I wish the students knew this about my experience. And for the students to say, I wish the faculty, staff, and administration knew this about my experience. And find the shared principle struggle, which is actually something I learned from Adrienne Marie Brown. Find the shared principle struggle and start there. Not at what we think the resolution is, but if we could start at the shared principle struggle and strengths, we can have a common denominator to help us. Adrienne, if we're speaking about Adrienne influencing this question, I've been trained by Adrienne in emergent strategy, and I'm a big fan of her work. And actually, my class for Silver, it's the only book we read, is Emergent Strategy. It's a class in spirituality and social justice. And Adrienne has a quote, and I don't have it in front of me, so if Adrienne ever sees this, I apologize if I butcher this. Is there's a conversation trying to be had in the room. It's our job to find it. And I believe that in every single conversation I have. Is there's a conversation trying to be had, there is a whisper, there is a need, there is a service. And it's up to us to unlearn enough about ourselves to come home within that we can be open to hear it. And if we can invite in others into that home, we'd have a very different world. So again, this is my cat Luna. Sorry about that. And I don't know.
Hello, Luna.
Question.
You did answer the question, right? And so this is something that I think about and that I've been in conversation with a number of people on campus. And the 20th century model of anything actually right now, but particularly here, bringing that to a 21st century student, right? And then, thinking about what does that mean, this particular 21st century student, whatever generation, that student may be, and the demand for transparency, a demand for the holistic, a refusal, in fact, to leave parts of themselves outside when they come into the classroom or when they come into campus, right? It's an adjustment, it's a shift that has to be made. And so the question that's underlying that, for me, that the unlearning can also lead to, or may be the thing that leads to a dismantling, right? A deconstructing, right? And that's very scary for people. So, right, it's very scary. And so, Adrienne Marie talks about transformative, right? Change is not like part of here, like in what I just read, but change is definitely part of it, leading to that transformation, right? And what do we need to do that? The other thing that I hear you saying is that oftentimes we go directly to this is what needs to be done, right? We are not process oriented in our approach. The process takes a long time sometimes, right? The process also is organic. So it requires us sometimes to do away with the structures with which we are accustomed to working in the academy, the kinds of data collection we do, the kinds of methods we use, right? But what if we start at the question, which is why, I'm always asking people questions. I think that we should all be 7-year-olds. We should be 70 years old or 70 years old, right? Questions like all the time. What are the questions that need to be asked? And
that's what our practices gives us, right?
Yes.
It gives us that pause to step outside of the resolution or the immediate urgency. And this is, again, another Adrienne Marie Brown, is be with what's most important, not the urgency, right? Because then we're not in our practice if we're in the urgency. Mm-hmm. If we're with what's most important, we're with our practice. And we're actually being our practice. And especially with this generation, I mean, I didn't have social media and 9,000 gadgets and apps and things that I just don't even get that when I was growing up or when I was in college. And I didn't have that overabundance of information distracting me from myself and from my path. And, I read once that in 1976, the amount of information someone took in a year, we take in a day. Mm-hmm. We have to slow down. And so that's where the practice comes in, is that it's like everything's solvable, everything's instant gratification, everything's like move, boom, 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 move on. Our Microsoft came, I think, said like a few years ago, the average attention span of a person is 8 to 10 seconds. That's the amount of a goldfish. We have to pause. We have to slow down. So that's why the practice is so important. And giving it in a way, and I'm sure you can relate to this, giving it in a way that the audience that you're offering the practice to can receive it.
Yes.
How you receive the practice may not be how I receive it.
Yes.
But it's my job in a leadership role to figure out how it can be accessible to all. And that's very important to also point out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, which is why I often use the broader term for me. Well, what is a broader term for me? Contemplative practices, to indicate that there are so many different types of practices,
right,
with the intent of helping us reflect or contemplate and to bring an awareness, a mindfulness to what we are doing.
That's right.
Right? There's so many different ways to do that. And the question in Yoruba culture, right, like to learn how to ask the question, right, to learn how to shape the question also helps you understand the response, right? Because if you don't understand what question you're asking or how you're asking it, you're certainly not going to get an answer that will serve you. And so the other thing that I hear you talking about is holistic leadership, but that working between students, that working between faculty and staff, right? What are your shared principles of struggles and strength, and finding that place where you can begin to ask the questions in order to work towards resolution. And then I think there's also the becoming comfortable that perhaps at this moment, there may not be a resolution. Perhaps there's more questions, right? And that also is very difficult.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I don't have the resolution of how to bring world peace, right? If I did, I'd be living a very different life. But I have a talent and a skill and a unique gift that can lend to the movement towards world peace, that I am grounded and anchored in. Yes. And I believe every single person has that unique gift or talent as well, but it's their unique gift or talent in their blueprint. And that's, to me, the most spiritual thing you can do, or the most human thing you can do, is be that truth, and to get very clear on what takes you in and out of that truth. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so just one more thing, there are probably several other things, but thinking about all of that you've said, and because we are often thinking about mentoring, what are some of the things that you would recommend for people who are mentoring others, and in this case, faculty who are mentoring students? What are some of the things that they need to think about, or how does it even change how we have been doing mentoring perhaps in the past and with this 21st century student?
Yeah, I recently was on a town hall for our student senate, and it was 4 other female identifying faculty and staff members that joined me. And we were being interviewed by the student senate, and it was a woman of color town hall and for the students. And it was really lovely to watch in the chat box. Every time one of us would go, the other 3 would be like complimenting or celebrating that person or chatting them up, lifting them up, And we got very real with our experiences of what it means to be a woman of color in an academic setting. And watching that, I saw a couple things. I saw, one, what we were modeling. We were modeling our vulnerability, and what we're trying to instill in others is bringing your full self to the table. We all brought our full selves to the table. And then we celebrated each other's full self and modeled that for the students, and modeled. And so for me, when I think about mentoring, it's really, knowing I am modeling something by, one, just holding the title that I hold, by the way I present, the way I carry myself, and and really being that authentic version of myself rather than performative, because people can sniff out performative. And it's actually really inspired me, the students, of being even more of my authentic self and being unapologetic about it. So I'd say modeling is one, is that you're always modeling something. And two, when I say mentoring, is really, and I got this from my Uncle Frank. And I try to get through a talk without bringing up Uncle Frank, and I never do. And it's a running joke in my family now at this point. But my uncle always talks about you parent each child differently, and you parent each child according to their needs. You never parent them the same. And as a mentor, I really try to get to know the magic and the opportunity of each student or each person I'm mentoring. Is what is their individual magic and opportunity. And when I get that, rather than telling them what it is, guide them to it and let them discover it on their own, because that's where you can get them to a place of embodiment, so it can be authentic and not performative. There's nothing more healing than giving someone your presence and that being enough. And so I think in mentorship it's not about everything I know and I'm just trying to pass it on to you. It's helping guide you to everything you already know and putting some extra sauce on it. So that's what I believe. And all the students that I've worked with or people I've mentored, one of the greatest compliments I ever get was from a student, Muhammad, last year, that said, Melissa gave mutual respect right off the bat. And that is the greatest gift I think you can give someone you're mentoring, is I'm not better than you. I'm not more special than you. I just have a little bit more experience. And so then we dive in from there.
Thank you so much for that. So I want to just wrap up. I want to thank you so very much for answering these questions that I had. They're like burning questions that I have for everybody. And I'm really appreciating how each of you, David, have talked about, again, this unlearning, this bringing what we have, like our whole selves, into the spaces in which we are working, and recognizing, too, that there are risks, like those risks are different for everybody, but how do more of us do that so it becomes less and less of a risk depending on who you are and where you are, and jumping into the unknowing, right? The unknown, and taking that. It's how sometimes you jump into your research. Just as a last piece, because you've answered a number of things, strategies to get to where we're going, questions and things we need to ask. So we've come full circle. Are there any last words you'd like to offer us before we come to an end in this particular section?
Yeah, I mean, if this is specific if other grad students, or this is specific going to go out to grad students or whoever is looking and is in a moment of change or pivot in their life, is to trust the calling and to know that the path is leading you to something. It may not make sense now, but I truly believe that your spirit, your innate wisdom, whatever you want to call it, can see something we cannot see in our human brains, and to just trust that calling, to be humble about it, to, I say this on purpose because I remember when I left the music industry and I was starting personal training, I got like an interim job as a promo model handing out mascara. And one time we had to go in front of my old building in Universal. And I was like, oh God, this is terrible. Like, how embarrassing is this? I handed out that mascara like it was gold. And I remember running into an ex-employee and being like, you look really happy. Keep that. And that was like, oh, right, I'm doing the right thing. Like my inner peace, protecting my peace is the most important. And if you're with your peace, you are on the right path. So I would say that. And I would also say, like, it's okay to get the job to help you pay for your dream. And that make sure you have care. You put care into everything, right? Like that you're providing care and you're asking for care. We're living in really, really uncertain, tense times. And this, we can do it, but we have to do it with care for ourselves and for others. Yeah.
Thank you so very much. I want to thank you and everyone who is here for joining us. And so, yeah, I want to again just give my gratitude to the Institute for Advanced Study and to the center and to everyone who's made this possible.
Thank you so much.
And our gratitude to you for facilitating this, Abagunde, and to you, Melissa, for joining us, because this is a wonderful and much needed opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you. Abagunde, it's a pleasure, as always. Thank you,
Thank
everyone, for hosting this, and just, I was very much like excited for this. It feels very scrumptious and delicious. So thank you.
Yes, indeed.